Friday past was Black Friday. Sorry, there's something. There we go. Black Friday. Black Friday. Now, Black Friday is known for big deals, big discounts, total frenzy. In fact, it's projected that at the end of Cyber Monday, which is coming, so this weekend, Australians will spend $6.8 billion on retail shopping, online and in shops. That's amazing, isn't it? Black Friday. Black Friday. And hopefully you've done all your Christmas shopping and it's it's out of the way. Now, Black Friday. Today I want to speak to you about another Black Friday. A much more important, significant Black Friday. A Friday which at midday, in the fullness of daylight, suddenly turned dark, pitch black, for 3 hours. That Black Friday was the day Jesus died. And it's recorded here for us in Mark chapter 15. Now, leading up to Jesus' death, Jesus suffers physical violence. And yet Mark's focus is on his humiliation. Not on his physical pain, but on his humiliation. On the fact that he receives ridicule and mockery. Mockery of the king. And so that's the first point I want us to look at this morning. It's the mockery of the king. The Roman soldiers mock Jesus. They make fun of him. They dress him up, verse 17, and they put a purple... There's something a bit wrong with this. Sorry? No, it goes from one to jumps forward. Okay, it's me, but let me try again. They dress him up, verse 17, and they put a purple robe on him. Then they add a crown of thorns, and then they cry out, "Hail, King of the Jews." They hit him, verse 19. They spit on him. They drop to their knees sarcastically. They pretend to worship him. And it's not only the Roman soldiers. Those were Gentiles. Actually, it's the Jews as well. So if you look in verse 29, those who passed by hurled insults, shaking their heads. Those were Jewish. And the Jewish leaders ridicule him as well. Verse 31, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mock him among themselves. He saves others, but he can't save himself. The soldiers, the Jews, and even those who die with him. You expect those, the rebels on either side of Jesus, they would feel sorry for him. But verse 32, those crucified with him heaped insults on him. So what about his friends? What about those who follow him, his disciples? Those are the ones who promised to follow him no matter what, who said they were willing to die with him, for him. They're nowhere to be seen. The disciples are conspicuous in their absence. Even a stranger has to be forced to help Jesus. Verse 21. We told a certain man, Simon, the father of Alexander Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and what did they do? They forced him to carry the cross. Jesus is mocked, humiliated, and abandoned. But note, in all this, there is rich irony. They mock him, pretending that he's the king, a purple robe, crown, bowing down, king of the Jews, king of Israel. The irony, Jesus is who they mock him to be. Jesus is the king. He's exactly who they say he is. Scripture predicts their taunts, and the charge is true. Jesus is the true King of Israel. He is God's promised Messiah. Well, that's the mockery of the king, which leads right up to the death of the king. Now, the death of the king is unique. It's like no other death before or since. It's unique in what happens, and it's unique in what's achieved. And the key to understanding that The key to understanding what his death achieves is to look here at Mark 15 at Jesus' two loud cries on the cross and the two signs that go with that. Two cries, two signs. The first cry follows and is accompanied by a strange and supernatural sign in verse 33. Can you see it there? At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. That's just weird. At midday, at the height of the sun, the lights go out. Darkness descends over all the land for 3 hours. At the birth of God's Son, there is brightness at midnight. At his death, there is darkness at noon. Now that's significant because darkness in the daytime, back in the Old Testament, symbolized something. It symbolized God's anger and wrath at sin. Listen to the prophet Isaiah, chapter 13, verse 9. The prophet Isaiah says, "See, the day of the Lord is coming, a cruel day with wrath and fierce anger to make the land desolate and destroy the sinners within it." Now take note. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened. The moon will not give its light. Can you see there? There, Isaiah is speaking. Darkness is a symbol, a sign of God's judgment against sin. And as such, a sign of separation from God. Which really helps us understand Jesus' first cry. Remember, the sign and the cry go together. Verse 34 is the first cry, where we're told at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cries out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Can you see it's the symbol of separation, darkness, followed by the cry of separation. Jesus suffers physical agony, yet his cry here is one of spiritual agony, relational pain. This is not an imagined separation or a felt separation. It's a real separation. It is to be God-forsaken. God the Son separated from God the Father. You see, Jesus suffers at the hands of his foes, he suffers at the hands of his friends, but most significantly, Jesus suffers at the hands of his Father. But why? Well, thanks for asking. It's a good question. Why? Because that's the very question Jesus asks. Why have you forsaken me? Now, actually, Jesus is not so much asking a question. Jesus isn't confused. He's not looking for answers. He knows the answer. This is actually a rhetorical question that he's asking. Why do I say he knows the answer? Because Jesus is actually quoting a sentence straight out of the Old Testament from Psalm 22, which perfectly describes his experience. So here he is on the cross, and he goes and searches all the scriptures, and he finds the verse that perfectly describes what's happening. And he says it. So why does God forsake his Son? What is it that separates us from God? Sin or rebellion? Jesus is God-forsaken because he suffers for sin. Not his sin, he's sinless. He suffers for our sin. He takes our punishment in our place. And the Father turns his face away. And the Son suffers God's anger at our sin. Little boys can get up to a lot of mischief when they're small, especially if they discover magnifying glasses. You ever played with a magnifying glass? It's great fun. And if you're a little boy, or maybe a little girl, when you're small, you can discover that if you hold that magnifying glass at just the right angle, all the rays of the sun will go through that magnifying glass and be concentrated at one single point. Well, God took all his anger at sin, his anger at all sin of all people throughout all ages, and God focused his anger down at the sins of the whole world onto a single point at a single moment of time, onto his Son at the cross. The sinless Son of God takes upon himself our sin and faces the wrath of God. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, for you, for you, for you, for you, for me. God forsakes his Son, separated for our sake, for our sin. Which brings us this morning to the second cry and symbol. Now, the significance of the second cry is not actually what's said, but what Jesus does. So verse 37, with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. Now, in the original language that the Bible was written, the phrase breathed his last strongly implies a deliberate death. It means, more literally, Jesus gave up his life. Jesus gave up his last breath. Jesus deliberately chose to die. And the sign which follows shows us what his death achieves. Jesus has given his life. So verse 38, at the moment Jesus dies, down the road, the curtain of the temple is torn in two from top to bottom. The curtain ripped up, or literally ripped down. Now, friends, brothers, sisters, that is massively significant. You see, the temple curtain wasn't like the curtains that cover our windows. It was a large, extremely heavy, very thick curtain. And it existed between the holy place and the Holy of Holies. It was a bit like one of those solid steel security doors on the vault of a Swiss bank. You know, it's this thick. It's solid steel. It's got all those windy things and numbers you press, and you just can't get in. It's designed to keep people out. The temple symbolized God's home, the place where he lived. But the Holy of Holies, well, that was like God's room. That was really where God dwelt. It was just a symbol. The temple was just a symbol, but that's what it was symbolizing. This is where God lives. And, the Holy of Holies, that's his room. And so the heavy curtain acted like a big no entry sign. Not allowed. It warned sinful, unholy people of their unfitness to approach a holy God. Only priests were allowed to enter the holy place, and only the high priest was allowed past the temple curtain into the Holy of Holies, and only once a year, and only with the blood of sacrifices, and only for a moment, and only while walking in backwards, which all served as a visual aid. Sinful people cannot approach a holy God. Sinners and God are separated. And so when the temple curtain is supernaturally torn in two from top to bottom, it shows that Jesus' death rips down what separates. Our sin and God's righteous wrath is set aside. His death destroys what divides us, what separates us, and gains access for rebels, for sinners, into the very presence of a holy God. Enemies become friends. Rebels are reconciled. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that incredible? I mean, if you want to meet King Charles, anybody want to meet King Charles? Okay, we have a hand here. Great. Anybody want to meet Prince William? Okay, a few more hands, okay? Who wants to meet Princess Catherine? Okay. But let's say you want to meet King Charles, and you want to meet with King Charles. Well, I've got some news for this young lady and for anybody else who wants to meet him. You've got a lot of protocol and red tape. You've got to make a request. You've got to fill in an application form. You've got to motivate it with good reason. It goes through 46 committees. I'm making that up. And eventually, you might even be granted an audience. But if you grant an audience, you have to have an appointment scheduled. And then you've got to be duly instructed on how to greet him, treat him, how to generally behave. You've got to be, security things, go through things that you don't have anything on you that can do any danger. There's loads of protocol. But when it comes to the King of Kings, Jesus rips up all protocol. The curtain's removed. And you and I can walk directly into the very presence of God. All because Jesus' death opens the way. And you and I can become sons and daughters of the living God. We can know him because God forsakes his Son for our sin. And Jesus' death opens the way for sinners to know God. Now, this great truth is actually surprisingly underlined by the insults that are hurled at Jesus. Passers-by hurled insults, as did those crucified with Jesus. But in verse 31, we've actually got the actual words which the religious leaders insulted Jesus with. So in verse 31, and the insults, there's a striking irony here. Verse 31, he saved others, but he can't save himself. The irony? He saves others by not saving himself. It's ironic. And again, verse 32, they say, let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross that we may see and believe. The irony? Jesus, by not coming down, makes it possible for us to see and believe. Jesus' death has paid the penalty for your sin and mine. Salvation is achieved, but it still needs to be received. Which brings us to the third question. It begs the question, does anyone, do you and I, see and believe? So what's the response to Jesus and his death? We've heard Jesus' two cries. We've seen two signs. Now let's briefly look at two responses. The first response. The darkness descends. Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And the response, verse 35. When some of those standing near heard this, they said, listen, he's calling Elijah. One man ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar and put it on a stick and offered it to Jesus to drink. Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down. What's going on there? What's the response? The response is confusion, blind confusion. They think Jesus is calling Elijah. They don't understand. There was some sort of expectation that Elijah would come back, or a figure like Elijah would come back before the Messiah. So they're thinking, and it's all just higgledy-piggledy and muddled. They don't understand. They fail to see and believe. They're not the only ones, though. And I wonder what our response is this morning. Perhaps we're like the Jewish religious leaders, angry because we see Jesus as a threat to living life our own way. We've got life neatly sorted out. We've got our dreams and ambitions, our priorities. And Jesus will just get in the way. And so we keep him out of the way. Or perhaps we're a bit more like Pilate, who simply chooses to ignore the facts. We don't want to be against Jesus, but neither will we stand up for him. It's just too much trouble. It's too much cost. We'd rather please others than be up against everyone. Or perhaps we're a bit more like the crowds. We just go with the flow. We're easily swayed. And our opinion of Jesus is formed by what others tell us. Or perhaps you're like those in the story. You're mockers, openly ridiculing Jesus. He's a swear word. Jesus is a joke. He's comic relief. That is blind confusion. But the other response is in verse 39. Jesus cries out, he gives up his life, the curtain is torn, and then when the centurion, who's a Roman soldier, he's not a Jew, he's a Gentile. When he stood there in front of Jesus and he heard his cry and saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Here is not blind confusion. Here is a believing confession. It's a confession of faith. A Roman soldier sees and believes. In other words, he recognizes Jesus for who he is. He believes Jesus is God the King. So what about you and me this morning? You see, Jesus dies in darkness. Black Friday. A sign of God's judgment on sin. Our world condemned. In this world, people walk in darkness. We are dead in our sin. Dead to God. We are separated from him. So how do we escape that darkness? Well, friends, we cannot climb into God's light. We cannot. The truth is, at Christmas time, at the birth of Jesus, God crashed into our darkness. God came down to us because we can't get to him. Jesus came as the light of the world, a light to the world, a light born to die in darkness. Black Friday. But this Black Friday is indeed a Good Friday, which gives us the best deal ever. Salvation. A reconciled relationship with God, transferred from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light, the kingdom of God's Son, the one he loves. And the cost, friends, it's free. 100% discount, no charge. How's that possible? Because Jesus paid on the cross with his blood. God forsakes his Son so that his Son may open the way back to God. So what is Jesus? Is he a crazy lunatic deserving of our sympathy? Surely not. Is Jesus a liar who deceived others into following him? Surely not. Is Jesus merely a good man who taught moral teachings? Surely not. Surely, this man Jesus is the Son of God. Let's pray.